is a Mets man. You'll find a Mets fan. Let's go. This is a Mets year. For all your Mets here, let's go. Bring it home. Bring it home. Bring it home.
Up, Mets fans? Welcome back to Talking Mets at Rob with another Mets pregame show right here on the channel. The Mets take on the St. Louis Cardinals in St. Louis, Missouri. The Mets are looking to take the second game of a 4-game series against the Cardinals. The Mets have won 4 out of their last 5 and looking to go 5 out of their last 6. And don't look now, ladies and gentlemen, but there is Met fans on Mets Twitter that are talking about a run for the wild card spot. Yes, there has been talk. The Mets are 7 games out of a wild card spot. And if you look at the schedule, there is 40 games to go. 7 back with 40 to go. Are you a believer? Most won't be. And that's understandable. I'm not a believer either. It would be very, very interesting, to say the least, if the New York Mets actually made a run in these next 40 games and find their way into a wild card spot and basically go into the postseason with basically Senga and Quintana as your best 2 starting pitchers. That would probably be Mets-like that we've never seen before. And again, very unlikely, but again, we talked about this for months. The National League is not very good, except for the teams like the Dodgers and the Braves. Who are you really afraid of? And that's the thing that I kept on talking about prior to the All-Star break, prior to the deadline, when the Mets had opportunities to make a run before the decision had to be made by the organization. And that's where the Mets are at the moment, and it does suck, ladies and gentlemen, because unfortunately for our New York Mets, they decided to crap the bed every opportunity they had to catch up in this race during the wild card standings. And they continue to not do that. And, you know, why people are getting excited about the Mets beating a team that is actually worse than them in the St. Louis Cardinals, because the Mets could sweep the St. Louis Cardinals, win, what is it? It'll be 8 out of 9. Let's see, 5 out of 6, 6 out of 7, 8 out of 9. And get a few games closer, because if that happens, they will get within probably 4 games of a wild card spot with 37 games to go. But what does that really mean? What does that really mean? Is that false hope? Probably. Yeah, Kendrick, and I get it, buddy. I get it. But it's just a matter of you took 2 out of 3 against the terrible Pittsburgh Pirates. And if you take 3 out of 4 against the terrible Cardinals, what does that really tell you? Because guess where you're going after that? You head into Atlanta 4-3, and that can put the last nail in the coffin. Because who do the Mets have pitching for them? And again, that's understandable. It would be interesting, to say the least. To be excited, it's very hard to say that, because it's an understatement. It really is. How can you get excited when your best 2 pitchers are Senga and Quintana, and then, Lucchesi is going tonight? But, I mean, who do you really have? You still got Tyler McGill going. You still got David Peterson going. I mean, you can't get excited about that. And even if you do find a way to get into a wild card spot, is it really the Mets going on a run? Or is it the rest of the National League not being as good and not even basically taking advantage of the situation of the National League not being good? And that's the situation why it should be more frustrating that when they had opportunities to make the run, they did not. And that's what's the more frustrating scenario that they put themselves in. I go back to the last 15 games before the All-Star break, and I said, go on a good run by the All-Star break. You'll catch up in this National League wild card because nobody's very good. The third wild card team is 4 games over 500. That's the threshold, and I would be shocked if any of those teams, most of them got about 40 games left. There's a lot of them that have like 60. I'll check it right now, just to give you an example of this. The third wild card team, it's a tie right now, right? It is the Reds and the Marlins, 63 and 59. Now, they haven't really played good at all. A lot of them going 4 and 6 out of 10 out of the last 10, 5 and 5 out of the last 10. You're going to tell me that, would you be shocked if they go 20 and 20 in their last 40? That's 83 wins to get the third wild card spot. That's 2 games over 500. And even if they go 22 and 18, 4 games over 500, or something of that realm where they go 2 games over 500 and they win 85 games. I said it all along. I think 86 wins is probably 85, 86 wins is going to get you the third wild card spot. And that is what is frustrating because of the fact, and I'm not mad that the organization made that decision at the deadline because Steve Cohen gave them enough time to go on a run. And that was in the middle of June when they were going through their worst stretch. He gave him an opportunity. He gave him the last half a month of June and the whole month of July until they decided to finally look like an actual baseball team the last 3 weeks of the season, but it still wasn't even enough because they never went on that 8 out of 10 or that 9 out of 10 stretch. And if they do that now, all that's going to do now is give a little bit of false hope. And even if you're the biggest pessimistic Met or optimistic Met fan, you look at the rotation and you can't really do anything about that. You just hope that you can, find ways to win ball games, which this team has actually looked like they showed, when they're actually better than the Pirates and better than the Cardinals, they can beat those teams. Yeah, exactly, Victor. Who would pitch for us? And again, I've seen teams not pitch well at all and find their ways into the World Series. Like, you see it all the time. Like, again, this is what I was talking about in the National League a month ago, that the National League is not very good at all. There's a pretty good chance that the third wildcard team is going to have between 83 and 86 wins. Because if you notice the Marlins and the Reds, they've been hovering around the 3 to 5 game over 500 mark for about a month now. That's how bad it's been. And that's why it's frustrating that when you had Verlander, when you had Scherzer, when you had Robinson and Pham and Canna, you couldn't go on that 8 out of 10 or 10 out of 12 stretch that you needed to get back into the race before the deadline. Because all the Mets had to do was get to 500. Numerous times they were 5 games out of under 500, and we're like, okay, something's going here. You had to get the 500. If you would have got the 500, and that's why I was so upset with that Boston series, because I think that was the series where the organization decided to make their decision. I think they were about 90% sure they were going to be sellers at the deadline after that Boston series. Now, if they would have swept the 2-game series against the Yankees and go into that Washington series before they made that David Robinson deal, maybe they would have had different thoughts. But I think if the Mets would have took 2 out of 3 against the Red Sox, they would have waited until that Yankee series to see what happens. And I think that Red Sox series, the way we lost was the problem. Where you saw Scherzer, who had his best outing of his career at Citi Field against the Dodgers on that Sunday, and then his next start was against the Red Sox. You would just assume, since the Red Sox aren't a better offensive team than the Dodgers, that Scherzer should dominate like he did against the Dodgers. Well, he did the exact opposite. Basically throwing batting practice and gave up 5 home runs in that game. 5 for a guy that had his best start of the year against the Dodgers his previous start. That's why it was so frustrating. And if you're the organization, how can you go into a deadline and say, okay, well, I trust Scherzer with his 4 ERA. He'll give us 1 good start, 1 bad start, 1 good start, 1 bad start. You can't go that and say, okay, well, I could stay pat or maybe get a couple of relievers and make everything okay. And it's just frustrating because, yeah, they can sweep the Cardinals here and win 8 out of 9 games. And they'll probably be within 4 games of a wild card spot because nobody's in that third wild card spot is running away with anything. Because there is no team that has gone better than 5-5 over the last 20 games that are in that wild card. The Padres are basically a game and a half better than the Mets. The Reds and Marlins, again, are you afraid of any of those two teams? The Marlins are a solid team, but they're a beatable team. Just like the Reds, just like the Padres, they're beatable teams. And, and that's why I said you got to be within striking distance, especially because I'm going to tell you, and this is why it was so important at the deadline to get within 4 games or even 5 games. I would say 4 games of a wild card spot before the deadline because, again, we go back to the schedule because it's so important. Who do the Mets play in September? If the Mets would have been around 4 games from a wild card spot, who do they play? Well, from September 11th all the way until the end of the season, they play Arizona, Cincinnati, Miami, Philadelphia, Miami, Philadelphia. The last 6 series of the year from September 11th until the last game on October 1st. Every one of those teams are in front of you in the wild card. Every freaking one of them. Well, B, they didn't break it up too fast. They didn't have no choice but to break it up too fast. What did they break it up? 3 days before the deadline with David Robinson? That's not breaking it up. And they traded Scherzer and Verlander basically 24 hours, not too long from each other. So they didn't. How do they break it up too fast? They didn't break it up on July 15th. All right? They didn't break it up on July 15th. They broke it up 3 days before the deadline. It's not like they broke it up 2 weeks before the deadline here. They gave this team numerous opportunities. Again, Steve Cohen gave a vote of confidence to them in his press conference in the middle of June when he had that press conference. He says, Buck's not getting fired. Billy Epler's not getting fired. It's been on the players up until this point, but it's also up to the players to make a run. He said it. Show me what you guys can do over this next month and a half before the deadline. What did they do? Not be very good. Because they needed to be at 10, 11 games over 500 from that point. And they were basically 4 or 5 games over 500, which wasn't enough. This team never showed you at any moment they were going on a run. Their biggest win streak was 6. That's the problem. So I'm not blaming the organization. The organization gave them a chance. They gave them numerous chances. They didn't succeed in those chances. There's nobody to blame but themselves. And that goes for the coaching staff and the players. I always blame the players more than the coach because if you played baseball before, you know that it's not on you. You can't blame the coach because you couldn't do something right on the field. It's just stupid. Unless the coach told you to play somewhere on defense that completely botched the play. But do we remember this team couldn't catch a pop-up in June? Did we forget about that team? Yeah, but B, the Mets weren't good enough to stay pat. That's the problem that people don't understand. The Mets bullpen was garbage. The only good bullpen arm in that bullpen was David Robinson that you trust every single time. Everybody else wasn't trustworthy. So if the Mets would have stayed pat like the Yankees, oh, by the way, are only a half game worse better than a wild card spot right now. They're 6.5 when the Mets are 7. But if you would have kept the rotation, then there's no guarantee that you would have been better off. Because, great, what if we didn't make a run and kept this team pat and didn't make any moves at all? With the bullpen that couldn't get out of their own way. And we didn't make a run. So now you got an older Scherzer, an older Verlander. You have Robinson, who you can always sign back for next year. Perfect. But that doesn't mean that they're going to be better or the same as they were this year. You don't think Scherzer is going to be worse this year as a Met? Because it seems like he can pitch out of New York, but can't pitch in New York. Because, everybody's going crazy about Scherzer, but he played against the White Sox, pitched against the White Sox, the A's, and the Angels. The Angels teams that fell apart after they bought and went for it, and they're basically worse off than the Mets right now. He faced the worst team in base, one of the worst teams in baseball in the A's, and the White Sox, who traded everybody away. So, and Scherzer, who this year, basically from September all the way until they traded him, couldn't pitch in big games. Every time you needed him to show up, he failed. And let's not act like we traded Scherzer with a 2 ERA, because we didn't. He had a 4 ERA. Verlander was pitching well. But again, we were losing with Verlander and with Robinson pitching well. We didn't go on this long stretch. You know why? Because every time Scherzer got the ball, he wasn't doing his job. And you had nobody else because McGill and Peterson was in there, and then finally Quintana came back. Is unfortunate. But let's not act like they pulled the trigger too fast. It wasn't July 20th or 15th when they pulled the trigger. They basically pulled the trigger on July 27th. Like, let's not act like they didn't give this team an extra couple of weeks. They did. They had their opportunity. They embarrassed themselves. They didn't play to this opportunity. And can we stop talking about all these guys like, oh, look at Alonso. Look what he's doing now. Look what McNeil's doing now. Look at Nimmo's doing now. Look at all the Lindor's doing now. Well, guess what? When the pressure is off, it's a lot easier to play baseball, isn't it? So now everybody who was killing certain players for padding their stats a few years ago, all of a sudden are going to give all the credit in the world to some of these players now for padding their stats when there's no pressure on them at all. You don't want to see the pressure? Here, sweep the series against the Cardinals and go into Atlanta and take 2 out of 3. Because if you sweep the series against the Cardinals, now the pressure is going to start amping up again because you're going to be a few games closer in the wild card. And now you're going to face your nemesis, the team you can't beat in the Atlanta Braves, when you got something to play for and they really don't. Why? You better take 2 out of 3. Because if you get swept by the Atlanta Braves, it's the same old Mets. It's the same old core that can't do the job right. That's the problem. No. B, I don't want to hear about 9-4. Wins and losses do not matter for a starter anymore. Because half the time, they don't pitch past the 6th inning. So the bullpen is going to determine the win or loss. I don't want to hear about wins or losses from a starter because it's very, very skewed. Very skewed. Quintana, since he's been back, has pitched well in every start. Yesterday was his first win. Why was that? Because when he came out of games, the bullpen lost the games for him. No, Joseph, that's not what I'm saying. My whole point is I'm trying to make the point that people are saying that they pulled the trigger too fast and that, oh, if they had this rotation, it could have been different. Yeah, maybe. But they also had 3 months to change the organization's mind. There should have never been a situation. This team should have never put themselves in a situation, put the organization in a situation to think about being sellers. That's on them. Scherzer had a 4 ERA. I look at ERAs more than I look at wins and losses for a starter. Baseball is not the same anymore for starters. You have to work. You have to lean on your bullpen more. So if Scherzer comes out in the 6th inning and he pitched pretty good, but not good enough, you know what? Again, Scherzer's biggest opportunity to show this organization that he can pitch in a big game was that Boston game when they could have won that series against Boston. Am I a Mets shill or an apologist? No, I'm actually a huge Met fan. And because you're new, I won't get on you. But it's not an apologist. The fact of the matter is, they should have showed at the deadline. I'm not mad at the organization. I'm mad at the fact that this team, now everybody's like on Mets Twitter, people are talking about, oh, look, they need to sign Alonso now. Look at McNeil. Look at Nimmo. Imagine what they would have done if they didn't sell. Yeah, they had 3.5 months before they sold to show the organization how good they actually can be. That's the problem. I'm pissed off at the players because now the pressure is off and all of a sudden they're starting to play well. Guys who basically shriveled and folded like a cheap suit when they faced Atlanta. Why couldn't you split a series against Atlanta at home? A team like Atlanta who is beating you up on your home field because it's fun. You heard all the quotes from these players, the Braves players. They have nothing to play for. They won the division already. They were beating you up and putting runs on the board like crazy, not taking anybody out of the game because it's fun to beat the Mets. They're laughing at us. Why couldn't the Mets, who, if according to the players, still got something to play for, well, where was the proof in that series against the Braves at home when you were getting embarrassed against the Braves, who have nothing to play for except embarrassing you? No, B, I understand they can have bad seasons. But the fact of the matter is, you could not go and trust Scherzer next year when all of a sudden you couldn't trust him. You couldn't tell me every time Scherzer took the mound, you knew you were going to get a good start. That's the problem. That is the problem. Verlander was pitching well, but we were still losing games that he pitched. It's not all because of him. Again, if you're going to look at individual efforts, well, what about the offense that couldn't score runs when they were actually pitching well? What about the first month and a half when a pitcher for the Mets, a starter, couldn't go 6 innings until the middle of May? That's the problem. That is the problem. It's not about being robots, but what I've seen from this Mets core is that when the tough gets going and the pressure is on them, example number one, the Braves series, when they had a 1-game lead going into that series, and all they had to do was win one lousy game. One. Scherzer failed. DeGrom failed. Even though DeGrom pitched better than Scherzer and Bassett, all of them failed. Not one of them stepped up. Scherzer, who you gave $43 million to, did not step up. Okay, we lost the division. All right, we still got Bassett, we still got Scherzer, we still got DeGrom going to the Padres series, who you should have been better than. And you didn't show, the pitchers didn't show up there either. DeGrom pitched pretty decent in the second game. Other than that, Max Scherzer was knocked out basically before the third inning. Bassett was a disaster. Yeah, Matt, he still looks good against the White Sox and the A's and the Angels team that basically have given up after the trade deadline, after they bought and basically lost ground after they bought. Let me see Scherzer in a big game for the Rangers when it actually matters. Because right now, the Rangers and the Astros are fighting it out for that AL West. Let me see Scherzer shut down the Houston Astros. Then we can talk about him. But then again, he's pitching in Texas, where the Texas Rangers fans are more concerned about training camp for the Dallas Cowboys and finally signing Zach Martin for their line than the Texas Rangers. When you got 5 microphones in front of you in the clubhouse as a Ranger, you got 40 microphones in front of your face, where Scherzer's shown when the pressure got on and people, media, and fans were turning against him, we see him have a totally different vibe and a totally different attitude. It's a lot easier when everybody loves you, right? It was easy for Scherzer earlier in the first part of last year when everybody loved you and Scherzer couldn't do no wrong. But as soon as adversity happened, he couldn't pick it up. Because we all forget about Scherzer for the Washington Nationals in the playoff run. If it wasn't for Patrick Corbin or Steven Strasburg, Max Scherzer wasn't doing the job. He pitched worst out of all of them. Just saying. B, but you acting like the Mets didn't have a chance to go on a run here because they never showed you that. The Mets had to make a decision before the deadline. You said stay pat. If they would have stayed pat, they have one of the worst bullpens ERA in the National League. How are they going to win games when the only guy you can trust was David Robinson? So great. We're going to have starters that go 6-7 innings. Great. And then the bullpen comes in before Robinson and blows the game like they've done basically the entire year. They had opportunities to go on runs. It's just that simple. No, B, it doesn't look stupid because it's not just the prospects panning out. And this is what people have a problem with. And B, I'm going to tell you this too, and you're falling into the same problem a lot of Met fans were when the trade deadline happened. And you know what that is? The fact of the matter is that you think just getting prospects is that you're counting on the prospects to be good. No, you're not just counting on that. You know what you're counting on? Now the Mets can actually make a trade when they need to make a trade. You know, that trade deadline last year when the Mets should have went all out and made trades to make their team even better than what they were at the deadline, because teams that are actually going for it this year actually went for it at the deadline, unlike the Mets who half-assed the deadline last year. You know why they couldn't do that? Because their farm system was absolutely garbage. Because if they did trade top prospects away, like, say, a Mauricio or maybe even a Beatty, to get better players to add to their already one of the best teams in baseball last year. You know why they couldn't do that? Because if they did that, their farm system would have been even worse off. Now, getting the actual organizational depth of this trade deadline, because you got all those prospects, now you're more willing to make a trade because it's not going to kill your farm system. That's why. And we forget that every time Scherzer had a chance to pitch good, he shit the bed. And B, I'm not affiliated with no team. I'm a fan that is actually realistic. The problem is you can't take the emotion out of it. You can't take the emotion of the organization actually having a plan that the New York Mets have not had through the Wilpon era. They had a plan. Yeah, he's a Hall of Fame pitcher, but he wasn't a Hall of Fame pitcher ever since September of last year. He doesn't still look good. What are you looking at? I'm sorry. My grandmother can pitch well against the A's and the White Sox, who traded guys away, and the Angels, who actually bought and actually basically gave up on their chance of making the playoffs because the way they looked after they bought. Again, again, there's less pressure on Scherzer now than there ever was with the Mets. So it shows you, wow, it's a little easier pitching under less pressure, isn't it? Again, have you listened to sports talk radio in Texas? Dallas, Texas? No, you probably don't. That's okay. You shouldn't. But who blew it up quick? No, you're being patient and logical, which was the same way the Mets acted under the Wilpons. Oh, you know what? Let's buy a little bit at 2019. Let's get Stroman and fake the fans out of Karen, knowing that they weren't going to sign Wheeler in 2019. 2021, oh my God. Cohen just bought the team, right? He still had the Wilpon filth on them. Sandy Alderson was running things because that was the only way he was going to get the votes from owners to own the Mets. So what did he do? He let Sandy Alderson run the show. You know what Sandy Alderson did and stupidly did for a 2021 Mets team that wasn't very good? Let's trade one of our top prospects in Pete Crow Armstrong, who is basically ranked top 10 in MLB's top 100, for Javi Baez rental that ended up being a disaster for the Mets. You know what that means? You know what that was the Mets? That was patience. That was logic. That was stupidity. You're mad because they actually had a plan that you didn't like. Nobody's saying that the plan is going to work. But if the plan does work, you look like a fool because you're more concerned about going on a run that they were never going to go on. And if they go on a run now, it's because they played the Pirates and the Cardinals over the last 7 games. If they find a way to win 2 out of 3 against the Braves and say sweep the Cardinals, well, great. It would have been nice they would have done that in June when they couldn't catch a pop-up or stop making errors, or the pitcher can actually pitch a game. But we gave them a full season last year, and every one of them underperformed this year. That's the problem. I'm sorry. You know when we needed Verlander? In April. That would have been nice. What about the whole month of May when he was trying to come back from that injury that he didn't pitch from in April? And it took him a whole month of May to figure out everything. It's not our fault that it took him 2 months to find the Justin Verlander that we've seen for the last couple of years. That's the problem. Scherzer was basically garbage for 3 months. Quintana was hurt. You had McGill and Peterson pitching. And Denny Reyes. Yeah, no, because you know what the free agent players see? Money. You know why Scherzer came here? Who actually told Met fans he didn't want to be a Met. You know why he went to the Mets? Because of the money. I don't want to hear that nonsense. He's impulsive? Yeah. And guess what? How many times did Steinbrenner get every free agent he ever wanted? If he was so impulsive, why did Sabathia come? Why did Teixeira come? Why did Burnett come? Why did Garrett Cole come? Why did A-Rod come? You know why? Because they gave him the most money. That's why. Has nothing to do with being impulsive. That's not impulsive. You know what the players see? Wow, he's willing to eat that money to make the organization better from the top to bottom. Players see that because you know what the Mets actually have? The Mets actually have, prior to the deadline, about $110 million coming off the payroll. You know how much money they're going to have now? They actually saved a little bit of money by trading Scherzer and Verlander. They're going to have close to $150 million off their payroll that Steve Cohen's probably going to put back the majority of that. No, B, no. Because you even heard Verlander and Scherzer in particular, who actually said that it's a well-run organization. He loved what Cohen did. Verlander said the same thing. Robinson said the same thing. Pham said the same thing. Canna said the same thing. Money talks. I don't want to hear that bullshit because he's impulsive. You know what he is? He actually had a plan and he stuck with it. He says, this is not working. We got to pivot. You're mad because you don't like the plan. That's fine. But that plan could actually work. How are they being political? Scherzer actually said his first press conference as a Ranger and basically showed himself for opening his mouth because he actually lied. Because a week and a half later, he went on a podcast and said the exact opposite of what he said. Because his press conference with the Rangers, you know what he said? He says, oh yeah, Steve Cohen says they're selling. They're not trying to win next year. And then a week later, he went on a podcast with AJ Pierzynski and he says, oh yeah, you know, they wanted to sell because they were trying to find organizational depth. They weren't going to be, they're going to find star-studded team. That's what he said. So he basically sidetracked what he said. And then if you're paying attention, which clearly you're not, Verlander was saying everything nice about the political conversation that you're talking about. No, but no. You see, you can't do that because Scherzer has a big mouth. Because as a Met, he made every excuse under the book. When he pitched well, it was because he figured something out. When he pitched bad, it was everybody else's fault but his. The excuse was sweat and rosin. That same excuse against the Dodgers at home, the one he pitched well in, he said, oh, he fixed his slider because he had dirt that caked up on his cleat that didn't make him pick up his leg as much. And then the next game he pitched was against the Red Sox. So clearly you didn't fix your slider. How about you just had a good night? How about you just suck now and you're not very good anymore and you're not the Hall of Fame Scherzer and you're not the Cy Young Scherzer you were 5-6 years ago. That's okay. But you keep on making excuses. You keep on making excuses for these players that had every opportunity to turn it around. Where was Pete Alonso in June when we had our worst month of the year? Yeah, and right wing, that's understandable about the analytic department because it's only been 3 years of Steve Cohen, who's put a ton of money into the analytic department and actually built that lab that Scherzer talked about earlier in the year that he was trying to fix himself with. That was only built this year because it took time to figure out how to do it. Right? You can't just throw money at a situation and say, okay, well, it should be fixed. That takes time. So yeah, the analytics department takes time. But you know what? You don't think Cohen's going to take Verlander's comments and try to do even better? Okay. And that same Houston Astros owner didn't vote for Steve Cohen to be an owner of a team. You don't think these owners have agendas? Come on. Do you realize the owners that voted in the Steve Cohen tax? Because they're deadly afraid of him. That's why. Because they know they couldn't do what Steve Cohen just did. To pay basically $130 million to get rid of older players, if you didn't realize they're actually over 37 years old, the majority of the players that he sold. Pay the other teams to play so we can get back the prospects we actually wanted back. And it's not about the prospects panning out. Not all of them. Because what it does, it gives you depth to make trades that the Mets were afraid to make at the deadline last year because they had no minor league depth. That's the problem. Now they have that depth. So that Corbin Burns, who will be traded in the offseason next year, in this offseason coming up, the Mets can actually afford to give prospects away for Corbin Burns. They can make the trades they need to make now because it's not going to hurt their farm system. That's why you do that. Because if the Mets would have stayed pat, their bullpen would have destroyed him. But B, he never did any silly stuff because you were probably the same person who was very excited he spent all that money and had the highest payroll in baseball. But you know what no other owner can do? Eat that money like he did and pivot and basically revamp a farm system that usually takes 3 to 5 years of tanking does. He did that in a year. And who cares about the hedge fund? Do you realize almost 90% of these owners probably did some bad shit? How do you think they got rich? You think all of them are fucking saints? Come on, B. You're ridiculous. Look, you don't like the plan. That's on you. Do your homework a little bit. You're not doing your homework. All you're doing is giving me nonsense because everybody in the comments agree with me. And a lot of these people that agree with me now usually don't. Just so you know, B, I know you're new to the channel, but a lot of these people that agree with me right now are usually the ones getting on me every single time. But how am I a Mets shill? Being a Mets shill is saying that everything was right. If you listen to me, which you didn't, go back to a week before the deadline. I said if the Mets, right before the Boston Red Sox series, I said they had 9 games. 3 against the Red Sox, 2 against the Yankees, and 4 against the Nationals. They had the 9 games to get within 4 or 5 games, which is usually the threshold. Organizations, if you look back for years past, what all teams do, they usually look between 4 or 5 games from a playoff spot. If they're between 4 and 5 games from a playoff spot, usually organizations decide to buy. And I said, why would the Mets be any different? You know where they were? They were 7 games from a wild card spot. 6.5 back and 7 in the loss column when 2 days before the deadline. So what are they supposed to do? And I even said this. They got a 10-game stretch. They only needed to catch up on 3 games. They're within 4 or 5 games, and I guarantee the organization would actually start to buy and help out the team a little bit. What do? They gained no ground at all. And you expect the organization just to sit on their hands and says, go get them, guys. I didn't give you 3 months for nothing. No. They actually had a plan, which the Mets organization have not had a plan in a very long time. You don't like the plan? That's fine. You don't have to like the plan. But don't tell me that that the plan is wrong when the plan that you actually loved, with a lot of Met fans did, including myself, that they spent a lot of money. Whoever they really wanted and needed, they got in their eyes. Okay, fine. The Cards and the Padres didn't blow up their team. Then if the Padres didn't blow up their team and they actually bought at the deadline, you know how much better they are than the Mets? A game and a half. Congratulations to the Padres. They're going to be playing golf with the Mets. The St. Louis Cardinals, they didn't, you know why they did not sell? Because they wanted the team who was going to trade for Nolan Arenado to take on that contract and also get prospects back. You know how that happens? That's why they didn't sell. Don't act like they didn't sell. They didn't sell because they stood pat. You know why they stood pat? Because they wanted a team like, say, the Yankees. Hey, you need a third baseman. Take on Nolan Arenado's contract, but we want 2 top 10 prospects. No team in their right mind is going to do that. That's why they didn't sell. So once again, you're wrong. The Padres didn't sell, and they bought at the deadline. How is that helping them right now? No, they don't have a foundation because they have no pitching. They just traded Flaherty away, who was one of their pitchers. They traded Jordan Montgomery. What rotation do the Cardinals have next year? What did they protect? What foundation? An older Goldschmidt and another year of older Arenado? They traded 2 of their guys in their rotation. What core? What core do they have? They traded Jordan Montgomery and Jack Flaherty, who were their 2 best pitchers in their rotation. So, oops, they sold. Oops. Yeah, okay, B, do your homework. Sorry. If you wanted to do what the Padres did, then why aren't the Padres in a wild card spot right now? Because they've been just as bad as they were prior to the deadline. They haven't gotten better. They're a game and a half. By the end of this Cardinals series, if the Mets find a way to sweep the Cardinals, they actually might pass the Padres. That's embarrassing. The Padres are probably, I guarantee you, because nothing is guaranteed. That's okay, exactly. So your plan might not work, but my plan might not work either. But the better plan was to get organizational depth in your farm system because it gives you the best opportunity to win in 2024. I can guarantee you that the 2024 Mets are going to be better than the 2024 Cardinals. You know why? Because they got no rotation, just like the Mets. But I know what the Mets are going to do? They're going to actually spend money to add to their rotation, unlike the Cardinals. The Cardinals couldn't get prospects back that they wanted. You know why? Because they weren't willing to eat some of that money of the Arenado deal or whoever else that had a contract on their deal. You know why they traded Montgomery? Because they didn't have to pay anything. You know why they had to trade Jack Flaherty? Because they didn't have to pay anything. I don't hear Cardinal fans being excited. What foundation? Because if they were so good, what are they? All just had an offseason? Okay, fine. We can put that. But it was the core that was the major problem with this Mets team. Pete Alonso underperformed. Lindor underperformed. McNeil, Nimmo, Marte underperformed. Yeah, they have a solid core, and they still got that core. The Mets still have that core. They didn't trade anybody who's a part of the core. Who's the core? A 39-year-old Verlander? A 37-year-old Scherzer? Who is showing signs of not doing anything in New York? The Mets kept the guys they believe can be a part of this core in 2024. Senga, Quintana. Senga has shown that this guy could be a top-of-the-line starter. Quintana has shown you since he's come back that he could be a solid starter. The Mets are going to spend money to build up their rotation and probably make a trade to build up their rotation. If I tell you the Mets are going to sign that Japanese pitcher Yamamoto, trade for Corbin Burns, and sign a Lucas Giolito with Senga and with Quintana, you're not going to like that rotation? Along with the core that you believe the Mets are, that you believe the Mets core is good, which nobody really knows because they haven't shown it. Montgomery's not a bad signing either. If you want him as number 4, number 5, no problem. But let's not act like you said the Cardinals stay pat. You were wrong. They sold their 2 best pitchers in their rotation. So what foundation are they leaning on? Because what they got back for those guys is basically nothing. So they traded 2 starters for basically middle of the road minor leaguers. So now they don't have 2 spots in their rotation. They're going to lose Wainwright. So who's their rotation? They're just as terrible with the Mets right now than anybody else. But the Mets had to do that anyway. Spend money on less proven players. Who's less proven? Because last time I checked, the Mets had the best rotation in baseball last year. Where did that get them? Right? The Mets, a lot of people considered, had the best 1-2 coming into this year. How did that work out for them? So 2 years in a row, the Mets had really good rotations, and it meant absolutely nothing at the end when it came to the biggest spots in the world. And you got to remember, look, and you're talking about teams like the Padres, who actually have one of the best rotations, one of the better rotations in baseball this year, yet they're not in a playoff spot. Maybe you got to work more on signing pitchers that are solid pitchers instead of giving $35, $40 million to pitchers who probably are past their prime and might show flashes every now and then. Maybe you need a couple of solid starters. Guys that can give you 6 innings of 2 runs, and every time they go out there, they're going to give you a chance to win, instead of guys that you're giving $40 million to, that you're paying $40 million to shut down lineups almost every single time, and they don't do that. Maybe going a different route and maybe putting a little bit more money in the lineup instead of the rotation and get solid starters, because I can tell you right now, I'd rather have Senga, Burns, and Giolito than a washed-up Scherzer, Verlander another year older, and who else in this rotation? Yeah, that was the Yankees. The Mets weren't going to sign Rodon, who is often injured. But you see, that's the problem. So you rather pay $43 million to a washed-up Scherzer and another year older Verlander, but give a 4 or 5 year deal to a younger pitcher who is actually having better seasons than Verlander and Scherzer, right? Corbin Burns, you trade for him, having better seasons than both of the other guys. Lucas Giolito, not great. Not saying he's better than those guys, but I'd rather give guys $25 million. You can get 2 pitchers that are solid pitchers for $25 million a piece than giving Verlander 1. Who's washed up? Who? Yeah, Joel. Kevin Gausman was the pickup, but Toronto, he took less money to go to Toronto. That's not the Mets' fault. Who has a 4 ERA? I mean, the point of the fact that the Mets. What numbers? Again, can you stop giving me wins? He has a 4 ERA. Could we stop acting like he didn't pitch against the White Sox and the A's? Can we stop that? Again, let me see him pitch against Houston. Let me see him pitch against Seattle or the Braves or the Dodgers. Let me see him 2 or 3 starts against those teams, and then we can say Scherzer is washed up. He was washed up with the Mets. Because every time you're paying him $43 million to go out there and give your team a chance to win every single time. He did not do that. He failed. He failed every single time. Again, you think Scherzer is this Hall of Fame pitcher that was pitching like a Hall of Fame pitch? You have more of an argument if he was pitching to a 2, even a 3 ERA. He was pitching to a 4.06 ERA the time the Mets got rid of him. You want to clash with me about Verlander? We can have an argument. I could have went either way on Verlander. I could have went either way. I wouldn't have minded if they would have kept him, but I'm not mad that they got rid of him because I don't want a 41-year-old pitcher that I have to count on next year. Because if he sucks next year, now you have him with 1 year left, and now you're getting less back if you want to trade him. Yeah, prior to June 1st, prior to his injury. Ever since that oblique injury, and then when he came back, pitched okay, and then after that, he failed. And ever since that, yeah, he had his best ERA for the first 3 months of the 2.5 months of the season. Then he got hurt with his oblique and was never the same pitcher after that. I don't care what he did in the first couple of months of 2022. It's irrelevant for 2023. And if you think he's going to be better in 2024, you haven't been paying attention to Max Scherzer. He cannot throw that slider consistently enough. Again, it's easy to throw your bad sliders against the A's who are on minor league ball club. The White Sox basically traded everybody away. He pitches well against them. Congratulations. And then the Angels, who actually bought, were basically where the Mets are right now in wild card standings, and they basically gave up. And the games he pitched pretty decent in, his offense helped him out a lot, didn't he? Yeah, he can give up a lot to charity. He better. He makes enough. I don't care what they do off the field. That's their own business. It's great that they do stuff for charity, but you know what I do? I pay money to actually see teams win. I pay and go to games. I'm a season ticket holder. I went the other day. I go to games still. I went to that debacle against the Braves. But I don't make an excuse. You got people in the chat that never agree with me agreeing with me because Scherzer was an absolute con artist. He stole money from the Mets. Yeah, when he struck out Judge 3 times. Again, he shit the bed against the Yankees, shit the bed against the Dodgers in LA because sweat and rosin. He shit the bed when the Mets actually still had a chance to make a run in Boston. Couldn't pitch against the Braves, got beat up by them. That's unfortunate. And again, I would want nothing more. Yeah, because when we needed him in April, he sucked. When we needed him in May to step it up because Verlander wasn't there and not pitching well, he wasn't. I'm sorry. Don't pitch against a good team. Yeah, unfortunately I was. So the shill that I am, I'm still the idiot that still goes to games. Probably unlike B, who keeps on talking about Scherzer like this guy's pitching to a Cy Young award this year. Because he wasn't. So with that said, guys, I got to go to work, unfortunately. So the Met game's going to start in about 20 minutes or so. Let's see if the Mets can take up another game. And look, I would want nothing more than the Mets to go on a run here and make a wild card spot. Because it would be amazing to me to see what they do with the rotation. I just said he pitched well against the Angels. But that's the same Angels team that basically have given up ever since they went. They're basically the same amount of games out the Mets are in the wildcard standings. And everybody knows that Shohei Ohtani's gone. How do you think you feel? Yeah, I'll tell you right now. Let's see. Let's look at it. That's always fun. Let's see. Let's see how good Scherzer pitched. It's a lot easier to pitch in Texas than in New York, right? Let's see. Let's see how it goes. Let's see. Let's check it out. Texas Rangers. This must be fun. Texas. Here we go. Texas Rangers. I believe he pitched a couple of days ago. Let's see. It's pulling it up. Gray pitched that game. Giolito pitched. All right, I think it was this game. Let's see. Excellent. 7 innings, 1 hit, 11 runs. Love it. Great. That was actually pretty good. Great for him. Let's see. He had a really good start. Really good. I didn't realize the Angels were murderer's row besides Ohtani. Drury, Moustakas, Wallace, Renfroe. Yeah, I'm scared of that lineup. Again, he'll have that game, and then he'll pitch next game. Who does he pitch against next? That's what I really want to know. That's even more fun to look at. All right, so he's probably going to face, let's see, pitch 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So he'll pitch against Milwaukee. Not a very good offensive team. We'll see. He'll pitch against Minnesota. Not really good. And he might even pitch against the Mets. Let's see how that one goes. Again, Scherzer didn't do the job here. I can care less what he does with the Rangers. A lot less pressure. A ton of less pressure. He pitched well against the Angels. Great. Let's see him do it against a really good offensive team, like the Braves, the Astros, the Mariners, the Dodgers. We'll see that. And again, no matter what he does with the Rangers, he did not do it with the Mets in 2023. But what are you talking about? But it does count. Because great, he wins a game against the Oakland A's. Shouldn't he do that every single time out? I'm sorry. But he can pitch 4 no-hitters in a row. He was not good for the 2023 Mets. When we needed him most, he failed. And he's the big reason why the organization decided to sell. So with that said, okay, B, great. Enjoy Max Scherzer's starts because they're irrelevant, because when he wore the orange and blue, he fucking sucked in 2023. If you didn't see that and you're clamoring for whatever freaking hope you wanted with this team that had 3.5 months to show any signs of life, they did it. And that's including Scherzer. Because that Boston game where he should have dominated, B, I don't care. They're not robots. That's fine. But that doesn't mean the organization can't make a plan and made a decision. So so Steve Cohen would have said, well, they're humans. They're not robots. I'm going to stay pat. And then they don't go on a run. And now you got older pitchers next year. And if you don't make sign-ins with more pitchers in the rotation and you go with the same old guys and they fail again, then what are you going to do? Now you get nothing for these guys. But B's okay because we were patient. Come on, guys. I don't care if they're not robots. They're professional ball players. And they had opportunity to show their organization that they were actually a good team. They showed that they weren't this year. Maybe it's a fluke. Maybe it is. We'll see. Okay, again, but B, then your argument's pointless. Because you're telling me that they jumped to conclusions too fast and you act like they on July 1st they traded players. They didn't. Yeah, okay. But when we're going to be right? One of us are going to be right. One of us are going to be wrong. We might both be wrong. Who knows? The fact of the matter is the 2023 Mets failed to do their job. There's consequences for that. You can't fire the players. Buck Showalter is going to lose his job because the players didn't perform on the field. Yeah, because you know what? June was embarrassing. They should have. You're right. So with that said, guys, enjoy the game tonight. Joey Lucchese's on the mound for the Mets. Let's see if they can take the game 2 of the series and win 5 out of 6. Who knows? They might go on and run and win the World Series without Max Scherzer. Wouldn't that be great? I would rather win the World Series without Max Scherzer because that would make all the excuses Max Scherzer gave pointless. And maybe we should beat the Rangers in the World Series on top of that. Well, too bad for him. You know what? Availability matters. When you're paying $43 million, you got hurt. Great. All right, you missed a month. Fine. But it took you another month of May to get back into form. It was too late for the Mets, unfortunately. And I think Verlander's fine in Houston. He's comfortable making $43 million. With that said, everybody have a great night. As always, let's go Mets. I'll see you next time, guys. I got to head to work. Good night, guys. Have a good night. Let's go Mets.
Meet the Mets, meet the Mets. Step right up and greet the Mets. Bring your kiddies, bring your wife. Guaranteed to have